Welcome to State of Tech, Synachron's innovation podcast. Synachron is a leading global digital transformation consulting firm focused on financial services and big technology organizations. Our State of Tech podcast hosts subject matter experts and business leaders as they explore emerging technologies, industry insights, innovation trends, and more. Let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome to State of Tech, Synachron's podcast on the forefront of technology. I'm one of today's hosts, Momin, Global Chief Information Security Officer and Head of Enterprise Risk.
And I'm Chris Zanelli, Head of IT Risk and Security Practice at Synachron.
So today we're going to discuss the various approaches to cyber risk management and the methods for cyber risk reporting, including the role of cyber insurance to mitigate reputational risks. We're also excited to have a special guest joining us to discuss the cyber risk management landscape. Please welcome the CEO of xAnalytics, John Frazzini. John, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and xAnalytics?
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this podcast today. My name is John Frazzini. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called xAnalytics. We are a cyber risk management software application. We've been in the marketplace for several years, bringing transformation to how organizations bring business clarity to cybersecurity risk. By way of background, I spent many years in my foundational early part of my career in a law enforcement and national security context, looking at coming up with strategies to not only investigate, but provide protection related to critical infrastructures from banking sectors to healthcare, et cetera. So I got my foundational background in this industry, looking at how organizations were being impacted by the existence of the emergence of cybersecurity attacks. And so I bring that perspective into what we do to try to bring proactive solutions to our clients related to mitigating their ultimate business exposures that they may experience related to cybersecurity risk. So here at xAnalytics, we're on a mission to bring clarity to the complexity of cybersecurity risk. We look at it from an impact analysis and mitigation prioritization basis, and we're doing all sorts of interesting things. We appreciate the collaboration we had with Synachron, and I look forward to participating today.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get this topic started. We're here today to talk about cyber risk. We've obviously seen in the industry very dynamic and explosive growth in both the volume and sophistication of cyber attacks. And its impact to cyber risk management has changed the ballgame for organizations and how they address cyber risk on an ongoing and regulatory basis. John, would you be able to give us a little bit of a rundown of what is modern challenges in cyber risk management today and why it's so important for organizations globally?
Yeah, I think the ultimate challenge that we're seeing as a trend, this is a macro trend, but we see it across the board. And I use the word context. Organizations are looking for the ability to contextualize the potential business exposures they have related to the complexity of cybersecurity attacks. People within the cybersecurity industry, oftentimes, generally speaking, understand how to talk with each other and communicate to try to solve the problem of how do you protect an organization from attack, or how can you proactively use technologies or other strategies to mitigate risks. However, what you see in the marketplace, and we see this through the expression through our customers, at the end of the day, organizations are looking to contextualize what that means in a business context. And so what's important for companies now, after the evolution of this industry, is the ability to understand how they can optimize their risk-reducing strategies so that they can effectively communicate, align budget, prioritize mitigation actions, and overall just come up with a more of a business intelligence approach to dealing with the complexities associated with cybersecurity. So if I were to bring it back to the beginning of my comments, it's really about delivering business context that can lead to effective risk-reducing outcomes. And at the end of the day, that's what customers are looking for beyond the security function.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. From a CISO perspective, we must always operate on the assumption that a breach is inevitable. So to me, cyber risk management is first and foremost about taking a risk-based approach to defend against cyber attacks, and then essentially prioritize response and recovery preparedness efforts. So that's essentially starts with taking a top-down approach to understanding what are the risk exposures and how would you mitigate risks to acceptable levels. That to me starts with first engaging with the business, right? Working with the executives. What are their top business risk priorities? What's on top of mind for them? What are the critical assets that we're trying to protect that are most pertinent to the company? And what are the different types of threats that could pose harm to the business? So it's important to gain that sort of top-down view of what the business risks are. And once that can be established, you can look at the countermeasures that would need to be in place to mitigate those risks. Once that is established, then you can then prioritize your roadmap and initiatives to prepare against the inevitable cyber attack. So essentially taking a top-down approach, putting in the business context, and then prioritizing investments to mitigate risks where it matters the most is really important. Could you or John talk about how an organization could measure the effectiveness of a cybersecurity program to ensure risks are being mitigated to acceptable levels?
Security organizations and operational teams have always been measuring their success in terms of remediation of finite numbers of vulnerabilities or exposures that are found, which is quite a pragmatic approach to operating level issues. But the real challenge is enumerating risk and calculating risk exposure and concentration really starts to require that you bring in elements of your business and your critical business systems that you're reliant on to make a market or produce the revenue streams or lines of business efforts that sustain your organization. In order to really have a conversation with senior leadership, C-suite, and board of directors, it's really important to speak their language and not bring up traditional ways of counting vulnerabilities and looking at high, medium, and lows, but really be able to transform those into contextual areas of non-compliance and categorized vulnerabilities that are not just risk-weighted from their endemic or intrinsic risk to the organization, but are also put through the lens of the organization in terms of critical lines of business, critical infrastructure that sustains the organization, and critical data sets that are potentially exposed or at risk. Once we begin to have those conversations in a business context and can equate those vulnerabilities to dollar values in terms of impact and what is at risk, I think that's when we start having more meaningful conversations.
I think what you just hit on, Chris, is really where the rubber meets the road. There's really a tectonic shift that's taking place in cyber risk management. And the shift is moving from cybersecurity administration, like vulnerability management, threat detection, mean time to close analysis, to something more business tangible. And that is, how do we take an impact analysis approach and identify the areas where we can actually implement risk management strategy to effectively not only reduce risk, but communicate it across the C-suite up into the board of directors. And here's the three things that I would say are happening. Number one, the ability to take a look at the control strategy that you're deploying. So control effectiveness. How can you contextualize how the controls that you're focusing on actually can introduce risk reducing value to the organization? Number two is technology selection. Which technologies are most effective if deployed properly to actually reduce business risk? That's been elusive to many organizations. And then the third is risk transfer optimization. So if you're looking to design a state-of-the-art plan moving forward, the tectonic shift breaks down to some very understandable levers. How are we incorporating control effectiveness, technology selection, and risk transfer optimization in a unified way to communicate the overall value of our cybersecurity initiatives? We need to learn to come up with these new state-of-the-art approaches where risk management from a cybersecurity perspective is understood and the effectiveness of mitigating risk is clear to the business.
Those are great insights, John. I appreciate it. One thing is that we talked about at the top of this call was a breach is inevitable, right? So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when a breach is going to occur. Given that, how would you say companies should ultimately estimate the long-term financial impacts of a major breach, and what can we do to mitigate those types of risks?
Here's the good news, right? There's extensive information now available. We bring it forward to our customers on a daily basis, working with you guys and others. But the ability to understand the financial exposure that companies face is now within reach. You can actually bring forward business impact analysis that's based on real historical incident analysis. It goes beyond just what threats are most seen within the cybersecurity industry to how are those threats actually introducing impact. That extensive analysis is now available. Think about it almost as if it's an actuarial database that's being collected of how cybersecurity incidents are actually introducing impact. That can be broke down against industry verticals, applied to specific company risk profiles, You can benchmark it across industry sectors. And so the ability to actually apply what threats are most likely to introduce impact from a financial exposure perspective is something that's available in the marketplace today. And many leading organizations are taking advantage of that to apply to the way that they're coming up with the strategies that they're going to use to proactively mitigate likely scenarios that would lead to that impact. So it's really that impact analysis that leading organizations are deploying so that they can be looking at cyber risk management from a proactive risk mitigation perspective, as opposed to a reactive basis, which has been the historical reality of this particular topic.
I'm curious now for organizations that might be looking to reorient themselves in this way and coming up with measurable approaches to determining these impacts. What types of approaches do you think they could prepare themselves for this transformation?
So the first thing we really see in the marketplace is how customers are rethinking how they're trying to solve this problem. I mentioned a little bit earlier, what we do every day is to bring business clarity to the complexity of cybersecurity risk. The industry for the longest period of time has been operating in a silo. There's been disjointed data sets. There's been cybersecurity performance data that's been used in an effort to try to bring business insights. A good example of that would be, as I mentioned earlier, in stock performance, mean time to close, vulnerability management metrics. And so oftentimes what people do is they say, in the history of our industry, better vulnerability management reduces risk. That's been elusive. Depending on who you speak with, it's potentially not even that helpful from a risk management analysis perspective. And I'm not here to say, don't focus on managing the vulnerabilities that you have, but the inability over time to prioritize what that means to the business has been the missing piece. And that's where many organizations have struggled to move cyber risk management beyond the technical into the business environment. So it's really the ability to understand that what's come before isn't necessarily bad. It's good to have a focus on vulnerability management, but to continuously try to articulate that is the only way that you're going to reduce risk. It's just not what you're seeing in the marketplace today.
Yeah, I would agree with that, John. And I think from a CISO perspective, again, it comes back to understanding what are the top business risks? What is that business impact to the organization? So I think there's some other factors also that need to be considered. I think historically, CISOs have taken a qualitative approach, which is to understand what is the controls maturity. But if you flip that equation, it's understanding what is that financial impact to the business if a cyber event were to occur. I think there's different factors that need to be understood in terms of what are the potential direct costs associated with the breach, whether it's legal or external counsel costs or costs related to incident response and forensics work. I think there's factors in terms of trying to evaluate indirect costs to a data breach, which could be reputational, operational disruption. But again, the good news there is that there are some existing benchmarks and frameworks that can be used to help us calculate that. If you take a look at the IBM Platinum Institute's average cost of a data breach, there's some good data that we can pull there to help us quantify what that might look like. But lastly, I would say, I think it's important to leverage a proven framework that uses some kind of predictive simulation or models to look at the different various breach scenarios and the potential financial impacts to the company as well.
Those are all great approaches towards measuring those impacts. So thanks for that. Looking at it from the other angle, from the regulatory perspective, obviously there's significant increasing scrutiny around disclosure of cyber breaches and cyber loss disclosures, in particular, for example, mandated by the SEC when these events occur. How would you approach organizing and building a playbook for reporting and disclosing data breaches across the organization and to external shareholders and regulatory bodies?
This is what you're seeing across the boardroom community. Organizations like the National Association of Corporate Directors, the Digital Directors Network, two organizations that are looking at cyber risk from a governance perspective. How do you effectively communicate this exposure your organization has related to cybersecurity risk? Looking at this from a risk-based approach, a governance-based approach. And what it really comes down to, it's the ability to be able to answer a very simple question. So what? That's the question. What does this all mean? If you're the SEC, they want context. They want to be able to articulate what is the potential exposure this organization has to cybersecurity risk as it relates to how an investor may contemplate making an investment in a particular organization. They have to be able to answer the question, so what? What does this all mean? From a board governance perspective, same thing, same question, different function. The board looks at the CISO Thank you for all your cybersecurity excellence. We think we're hiring the good people. We're applying a lot of budget to it. They seem to be really working hard, but none of it makes sense. How can we understand it in a way that helps us do what we need to do? From an SEC perspective, right? They want to be able to collect information related to what does this mean from a risk exposure perspective as it relates to the investor public. From a board governance perspective, we've got oversight and governance responsibilities to make sure that this organization is functioning in a healthy, productive manner. We need to ensure that our organization is not going to be negatively impacted by this particular risk challenge. They do it in the same way that they do all other risks. The cybersecurity conversation is now evolving to become more mainstreamed in the way that boards look at this particular issue. So the ability to answer a very simple question, so what does this all mean, is the basis for how organizations are successfully addressing not only regulatory challenges from the SEC and others, but also how the emergence and demands that are coming to them from the boardroom.
Great insights there, John. Thank you so much. I think maybe switch gears a little bit towards cyber insurance. Given that insurance premiums are remarkably high at the moment, what would you say organizations can do to ultimately reduce cyber risk and to qualify for lower insurance premiums?
Yeah, this is one of the levers I mentioned earlier, optimizing a cyber risk strategy that can most effectively reduce your exposure to risk as an organization. You've got control effectiveness analysis you can apply. You can engage in mitigation prioritization discussions related to control effectiveness. That's lever number one, so to speak. Lever number two was technology selection, same concept. How do we deploy budget and deploy a technology stack that can most effectively reduce the risk to the business? And then the third function I mentioned was risk transfer optimization. How do we harmonize our risk transfer strategy so that we can ensure that if we do experience impact related to cybersecurity incident, that our insurance coverage is optimized to help us the best that can be done? The challenge, though, with cyber insurance really isn't about premiums. The biggest challenge that exists is alignment. How do we harmonize our actual risk to the actual insurance policy? One example would be, how exposed is a manufacturer who doesn't collect and maintain third-party PII data? What is their ultimate exposure to data breach? Extremely low. Okay, they're a manufacturer. They've got different insurance transfer needs where that particular manufacturer has just been sold the wrong insurance policy. The first thing you need to do is align the actual risk you have to the policy that you buy. And that's the big challenge that needs to be solved on the macro level. That goes way beyond, if not adjacent to, whether or not your premium's high or low. It's whether or not you actually have insurance or not that matters to you. It'd be like buying auto insurance and you get vandalism coverage, but you don't get collision coverage. Like, how useful would that insurance be to your auto policy? So optimizing the actual policies you have to the risks that you actually are exposed to is critical. Many organizations struggle with that for a lot of different reasons. So it's less about premium and it's more about optimization. And then the other macro issue in insurance, I think it's important to point out, you take a look at the annual cyber insurance industry. There's a lot of debates as to what organizations are actually spending and what they're exposed to related to cybersecurity risk. But it's a very small percentage of actual risk exposure being covered by insurance. And so if you use that more layperson's example in auto insurance, and you apply it to cyber insurance, that's the dynamic that exists. There's not enough capacity. There's not enough underwriting excellence to provide full coverage related to how organizations are actually experiencing impacts related to cybersecurity risk. Now, there are outliers here where the insurance performed exceptionally well against the way that we think about insurance. MGM is a great example of that. If you reverse engineer the cyber insurance that they actually had related to the actual financial impacts related to the ransomware attack that they experienced, 18 months, 2 years ago, that was a good example where insurance provided a pretty decent backdrop to covering the actual exposure. I wouldn't speak for MGM, but I would argue that the financial impacts was the least of their concern related to what they experienced in that particular ransomware incident.
That's a great anecdote to introduce that realism to the context of cyber insurance. I'm sure a lot of organizations view cyber insurance as a tool to mitigate or transfer a lot of their financial losses, but that comes with significant limitations and challenges. Before we wrap up today, would you recommend any specific approaches for organizations to strike that balance of risk transfer and mitigation from insurance versus seeking to remediate and quantify risk in a way where they can address the most impactful exposures?
the ability today to connect, if you have a proactive impact analysis based approach to your cyber risk management strategy, you will then be able to understand where you have likely operational and financial exposure. Once you have that, it's really simple to align that to the available insurance options that exist in the marketplace. This is where it breaks down right here in the handoff between cybersecurity metrics and risk transfer options. It's like one side speaks English, the other side speaks Martian. This is what's been happening since almost the inception of the cyber insurance industry. This is why the cyber insurance industry's growth is rather anemic and doesn't really truly provide the coverage that's demanded in the marketplace because they're not able to connect the English and the Martian. So if you take an impact analysis approach, where are we likely to actually experience impacts? And we map that to the available insurance. That's the approach to optimize how your cybersecurity strategy can deliver risk transfer harmonization. And that is an approach that I think many organizations are being enlightened to and discovering, understanding why the breakdown is limiting your ability to achieve success in cyber risk management, breaking down the silos and creating that common language of understanding. How can our cybersecurity strategy actually inform our risk transfer strategy is an approach that I would recommend organizations pursue, and it's available today.
Well, John, it's been a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Aaron, Chris, thanks for the time. It was nice chatting with you guys today. I look forward to any opportunity in the future.
Thank you, John, for your insights and Chris as well. And so to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the State of Tech. Be sure to stay tuned for the next episode, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Synchron State of Tech podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest and innovative technologies savvy businesses need to know about. To learn more about Synchron, head to our website at www.synchron.com. Stay tuned.